Today we are going to go through the assessment or the digital maturity model, dimension, system of record, and technology leverage. We've already gone through leadership, digital workforce, transformation design, and system of engagement. System of record is the next aspect of it. So just going through the agenda, we'll do a 2 minutes quick recap of the DMM so that we know where we are situated. We'll go to the system of record and technology leverage and completeness and some of the scorecard output and observation. I think, the scorecards have been very interesting and we'll cover that when we get there. But I think what's been more interesting is that people have gone through the questions, answered them. I think absence of a case study takes away some aspect of it, but clearly as people understand the questions, we'll be covering those as to what we found and what we did not find. Again, the 9 dimensions. We are on dimension of system of record and technology completeness and leverage is what we'll cover today. You will, at the end of the session, Madhavi will send you the questions to answer. It will be less than last time. It will be approximately about 180 questions. And unfortunately, this time we have a quick turnaround. So we need the responses by end of day tomorrow, your Indian Standard Time, so that we can crunch the results and on Friday, Saturday, and put it together for the Monday presentation to you. And then Monday we will do the session 5th, which will cover data assessment and operational risk and control, and which we will then have about 4 days to respond. So let's go on to system of record. So just wanted to highlight this aspect of it again, dimension 4 and 5, system of record and system of engagement. System of engagement is what we covered last time, and it was a lot to do with external facing on how do you interact with your clients, how do you interact externally, what kind of presence you have, what kind of tools you have that allow people to do stuff. And system of record is what we'll cover today. It's a more of an internally focused aspect. In fact, today's session will be more on the system of record and how your internal capabilities and technologies work and how much are you able to leverage it. So those are the 2 assessment and dimensions we'll be going through today. So with this, I will turn it over to Scott.
Okay, good evening, everyone. We covered last time the systems of engagement effectiveness, and just a reminder, the systems of engagement effectiveness is all about the software and systems and data that is used in building relationships or selling products or anything that is customer facing. And so the other side of that is the systems of record, which is obviously all of the back office applications, things like accounting systems or manufacturing systems or warehouse management systems, all of the systems that allow you to operate a company. Now, before we kind of dive into systems of record, just want to make a comment about something we've mentioned before, which is profit amplification. And so the concept of profit amplification, which is really important to a lot of executives, obviously, because profits are something that are critical, is tied directly to these 2 systems. So when you are very good with your systems of engagement, it means that you have the ability to drive revenue. And so you can drive revenue at a very high rate. You can control your ability to drive revenue. It becomes much more predictable. You have a much better ability to beat your competitors. And so that's why systems of engagement are important. They raise your top line revenue. Why systems of record effectiveness is important is because this is where you can automate the supply chain or the back office, and by automating you can lower your costs. And so we've been very successful working with clients focusing on these 2 systems. the systems of engagement and the systems of record, and getting leaders to understand the profit amplification model so that they take a balanced approach to how they invest. And so one of the things that we do with our clients is to really get them to view how much money are they spending on systems of record versus how much money are they spending on systems of engagement. And by understanding how much money they're spending on each of these, it gives them a sense of whether they're investing appropriately in their automating in their back office or on their front end of driving revenue. Now, this changes depending on where an organization is in the economy. If the economy is going up or down, they may want to invest heavier or lighter in one of these areas. It has a lot to do with what the opportunities are, or in some cases, what the latest technologies are. For example, artificial intelligence is getting to be a very important type of technology today. And we're getting lots of questions about how organizations can apply artificial intelligence. And so artificial intelligence can be applied equally with systems of record or systems of engagement. And but we really want leaders to be conscious of how are they using artificial intelligence, whether they're using it to lower costs and automate decision making on the back end, or whether they're using artificial intelligence in their marketing programs to help improve building relationships. So I just wanted to make sure we gave you that background before we start talking about the systems of record. So when we built this digital maturity assessment, again, there are 9 different dimensions. And, we are now a little bit more than halfway through what the dimensions are. And there are some of the dimensions that are very, what we would say basic foundational dimensions of digital maturity. And this one may be one of the most basic, which is, all of your platforms that help you to operate the company. When we do the assessment on this dimension, there's always a lot of very interesting information that comes out of it that companies do not expect. And so they often don't understand how the users feel about the systems that they're running. And so they will overestimate how well the systems are running until they actually do this type of assessment and find out from their users that there are lots of issues, or that there is a lower amount of people actually using the systems the way they should be used. Let's review in detail the parameters that we use for systems of record. So the first parameter is one that is, in an ongoing way, very critical, which is system modernization. And so obviously today technology changes so quickly, and software companies upgrade their software at such a pace with faster and faster cycle time that it is more difficult these days to make sure that a system is kept up to date, much less dealing with the issue of hardware that goes out of date, or software systems that literally can be replaced with a much better platform because a much better company has come along that has built a platform from the ground up on better technology. And so one of the things that a mature company would do is have a good ability to do system modernization. And this includes everything from what your cycle times are for replacing hardware, to how well you keep up with the maintenance on your software. And so this is a parameter that I think you will really appreciate the questions when you see the questions that you will be taking. And again, I just want to remind you of what Sanjay said. We will be sending you the links so that you can walk through the questions. The questions, though, need to be answered within the next day or so. just so that we can have some scoring from you to be able to put together the scorecards. But system modernization obviously is a very critical thing. We have walked into a number of clients who have not modernized their systems, and so although they might have all of the types of technology they need, the technology is 6, 7, 8 years behind, or maybe they're on a core system that is 13, 14 years old. I worked with a client yesterday who is running on a core system that is no longer supported by the manufacturer. And this is a fairly large company, and they've extended the life of this ERP system way past what really they should have. And so, their scores obviously in modernization would not be high.
So I think some real life examples, actually from the financial service industry and healthcare industries, what we find is that as people go into productization, people are going down the business application approach rather than a toolkit approach. So for example, when CBOL came out, CBOL was a very good CRM toolkit. Everyone bought it, no one could implement it. But when Salesforce came out, everyone bought it and implemented it because they had a point of view on how the processes on sales should work, and it configured the rules. So as people start evolving to business application based products and start buying those in the environment, what happens is if you do not modernize your system, if you do not keep upgraded what your capabilities, you miss out on all the massive features that are happening. And what happens is that the companies start building individual solutions to make up for those features, which otherwise was provided by the vendor if you upgrade it. So it's very important to understand the system modernization is not only that you have the latest systems and everything else in place, but also you have it upgraded so that you're taking advantage of all the functions and features that they bring to play. This is becoming a very big problem, and a recent analysis that I've done in a couple of companies, because of upgrade issues, they are not upgraded their applications to the latest versions. They were spending 20 to 30% more on the system maintenance on an annual basis that they could have avoided, and they were building more bespoke applications that they didn't need to do. This is very critical. As we go to the question, you'll get a lot more, but this is becoming a fundamental issue in the marketplace today.
Okay, and we have a question from Keith that we can go ahead and address. He asked a good question, which is, what about the complications caused by a customer taking a multi-speed IT approach? And yes, this does create some complications, but I don't believe when we define system modernization that we necessarily say that everything in the enterprise architecture needs to be fully modern. My observation today is any company that has been around for 30, 40, 50 years has a real combination of systems that, could be 25 years old and systems that could be 25 days old. And so, there's, yes, there are people that have mainframes. There are, people that, that are running just fine on those systems. And so I don't think by system modernization, what we're trying to say is that every piece of the enterprise architecture needs to be within 3 years old. I think what we're saying is that the organization is taking a pretty sophisticated look at what are the pieces of the enterprise architecture that need to be updated in order to have a return on investment. And so I don't believe it makes any sense to just throw away a mainframe and try to replace it when that mainframe may be operating and there really is not a high return on investment for replacing it. On the other hand, if somebody is running on a mainframe and it's causing them a number of data issues or functionality issues, then they're penalized from a modernization standpoint because they just haven't changed because of either financial reasons or they don't want to make the investment, spend the investment capital, or they just don't want to do the work of having to rip and replace the mainframe. So I get that. that it makes sense that for some people they need to take a multi-speed approach. And I also agree with you, Keith, that some people have systems that are so old there's no one that can maintain them. I also have had clients that have systems that are so old they don't even understand truly how they do what they do. They're maintaining the systems, but the system's almost a black box at this point. And so, we've seen all of this in enterprise architecture. And so, again, I just think the critical thing is to be able to look at your enterprise architecture and have a good sense of what needs to be modernized and what would have a return on investment versus, what can be left as just, incumbent technology that it works well enough. And there really isn't enough of an advantage to upgrade it. As long as it's up and running, then we can leave it up and running. Let's say just a couple more comments that I'll read just on this topic. Siva said a lot of customers hesitate to modernize for two reasons. Things are running fine, and there are other priorities, and there is a high cost of transition. And I agree that is true. Again, there are lots of reasons to not modernize, and then there are some modernizations that cause ROI. We're measuring maturity. And so, one of the things we really wanted to measure is just an organization's ability to make sure that they are modernizing in an intelligent way. Again, we are not setting a bar that everything that a company runs on needs to be 3 to 5 years old or younger. We are just saying that an organization has a very mature ability to be able to upgrade what they are doing. So, but absolutely agree that there are good reasons why some organizations don't modernize. All right. Thank you. By the way, thank you for your questions. And just to remind everybody, we're trying to answer the questions as we go along. So, we might wait a minute or two before we get a specific one. But we will always try to address your questions relatively close to the things that we are talking about. Okay. Let's look at the next parameter, business process alignment. This one is very critical, and it's also usually very interesting to people to see what the scores are. Because when you are asking a number of team members this type of line of questioning, in other words, how well does the enterprise architecture, the systems of record, how well do they line up with the business processes that are core to the business? And so we were just working, for instance, with a very large a food brand, and probably a lot of you would be familiar with their products, but they were talking to us about their supply chain. And so we were reviewing, what they were doing with technology in their supply chain. And they have many different vendors. They're outsourcing some of their manufacturing, and then of course they're handling the packaging. And when we looked at this, the technology that they need was not really lining up, obviously, with what they're trying to accomplish with their supply chain. And so, when you score, for instance, their business process alignment, it would be fairly low because they have a complicated supply chain, yet they really aren't using nearly enough technology, even some of the technology that's pretty widely available to allow people to communicate across the supply chain or for data to flow well across the supply chain. And this is a very large brand here in the U.S. So for this parameter, we really want people to understand how well has the systems of record been architected to support the key business processes. Anything you want to add to that, Sanjay?
No, I think the business process alignment is very critical because it allows people to understand that the systems you have internally, is it meeting the business pain points and business process requirements? And that's why it's very important to have system modernization because the latest function features and the business applications are left there, And system modernization, as Scott said, it doesn't mean that you have to have the most modern system. You should have it most updated system of what you have, right? So that you're leveraging the function features and it's aligned to the business needs and what they want and how they want. And with the fast evolving changes in the market, the new function and features become more and more critical for the business to maintain a higher degree of customer satisfaction and client retention.
Okay, so uh, here's what we see when we are working in the field with business process alignment. You have heard us use the word homology before. And so homology being the word that describes the integration of humans and technology to get something done. A consulting process that we use very effectively is to work with a client to identify, let's just say, their top 20 business processes. So what are the most critical top 20 business processes? Once we've identified those, we will then look at it from a homology viewpoint. We will say, in order to get this process done, how much human versus how much technology is being used in the process? And we will, of course, be looking for where are humans doing tasks that machines or software could do. And then once we have that view, we will look at the underlying systems of record and we will see, do they have capabilities that they're not using today? So a lot of times we will see systems of record where people actually have they've acquired the capability from SAP or Oracle or whoever they're running on. They just haven't really implemented the capability yet. In other cases, their platforms don't have the ability to do things like ad hoc workflow or integrated AI or to really push the data so that we can do consolidated BI. And so this is how we go about business process alignment, is we look at it from, what are humans doing versus machines, and then really try to understand, is this process maximized in such a way that, the companies are using their technology appropriately. Okay, the next parameter is operational efficiency. And so with operational efficiency, what we're looking at is how much throughput and how efficient is the technology making the organization be, or in some ways how automated is the system of record or the systems of record making the organization. And so a lot of times you can go into a client and they have purchased a lot of software. They have very sophisticated platforms. But as an example, we've seen large companies that have way too many redundant systems. They've had different departments that have all purchased the same systems, and so we've got data issues. And so we've seen people who have too much software or too many pieces of technology, so it's not efficient, or obviously in other cases sometimes not enough. And so what we really want to understand is how much throughput does our client have? What is their operational ability to have high-end throughput and to be able to scale their throughput with the system of record that they have? And so that is a matter of really understanding, for instance, how much can they manufacture and deliver, or how many transactions can they do, or how much service can they provide, and where do bottlenecks start to happen? And do these bottlenecks happen because of the technology, or do the bottlenecks happen because of people? And what we don't want is that the systems of record, that the software creates bottlenecks, that there's only, as the company grows, they're either going to outgrow different platforms that are going to now become restrictive, or literally the software cannot handle the transaction volume that the company is going to be putting on it. And so that's what this parameter is all about, is really looking at the systems of record and saying, all right, how much operational efficiency? Now, that includes, if you're in accounting, for example, that would include how fast can you close the financial books for the month. So, does it take you 30 days to close and get your financials from the month before? Or can you close the books in 3 days? And so it's not just the throughput of the operations of the company. Sometimes it's actually the efficiency of being able to do any one task. A good real-life example of that would be a large financial services client that we're working with right now that does lending. And this is let's say a $100 billion organization. It's a very, very large organization that does lending all over the United States. And today, it's typically taking them 5 days to make a lending decision. And the reason is not because it takes that long to make the decision. It's because it takes their software, or it takes their people and their software that long to gather all of the data, process the data, do the research, get the decision made, produce the documents to give back to the customer. And so in working with this client, they've said, hey, there are lending organizations out there that can make a decision in 7 minutes. So why is it taking us 5 days? And a chunk of it is because of the way that they're operating the lending process and the tools that they have built, which are all custom tools to be able to approve loans. And so they've now asked if we could give them some advice on how they could potentially shorten that time from 5 days, to a matter of minutes. But it's a matter of completely re-architecting their system of record for how they do lending. Okay, the next parameter is in-source and outsource maturity. Now, you saw this parameter with the systems of engagement. So the in-source and outsource maturity is the organization's ability to understand what they need to have employees to build versus what they use as contractors and vendors. And it's finding that appropriate balance for the organization. And this has everything to do with the size of the organization, the type of technology that they're doing, what the strategy is around costs for IT. The reason that we measure this in both systems of record and systems of engagement is in studying many, many companies. One of the biggest impacts on their maturity level for their enterprise architecture is how well they've built their internal team versus how well they've assembled contractors and vendors. And when we see organizations that have very average or below average systems of record or systems of engagement, it is normally because they just have not assembled the right team. And so that's why we see this as a critical parameter for us to understand the maturity level of being able to assemble their systems of record. And again, every industry, it is a bit different. If we're looking at banking, then, if they're outsourcing their core software to Fiserv or Fidelity or Jack Henry or one of the big organizations, we have to look at how they're doing that versus, what kind of internal capabilities they have versus what kind of contractors that they might have put together to help them. And so, again, this one's just a basic understanding of when you go to build your systems of record, what is the team like that you use to build and maintain those systems? And it is usually a very different team if you're building systems of record or you're building systems of engagement. That's why we ask this on both of these dimensions. All right, the last parameter is one that always produces very interesting results when we look at the scores. And that is the internal satisfaction with technology tools. And so you can imagine that if I go back through these, when leaders are looking at their scores, the system modernization, is just interesting because it tells them what people's opinions are or how they feel or how sophisticated the organization is with keeping up with their systems. The alignment tells them, this is how well we believe our systems align with what we say we're trying to accomplish in the business. Operational efficiency is all about, have we built systems that help us to operate at our maximum capabilities? In-source and outsource is all about the teams that we assemble to build the systems of record. The internal satisfaction is a measurement of our team members that have to use these tools. Are they happy with the tools or unhappy with the tools, and why? And again, this is always very interesting because sometimes our team members are very happy and pleased with the tools, and then at other times they have a lot of very specific reasons why they believe the tools are a problem. So if you add up these 5 parameters, you get a very good view into what your maturity level is with actually building these systems of record. Any other comments you want to make on this, Sanjay?
So I think I want to go back to operational efficiency. The aspect of operational efficiency is very, very important because you may be able to get good technology, put them in place, but the maximum amount of benefit to the business, and whether it's from a client experience, whether it's from a reduced cost, whether it's leveraging the technology, comes from operational efficiency. 70% of the benefit is come from operational efficiency. So the idea that most of the organization are not in the business of technology, they're in the business of providing service to the clients. As a result of which the technology should be an enabler and should create the operational efficiencies so that the servicing is good at a most optimized cost. So that's a very important component to understand because a lot of people still do technology for the sake of technology. In-source outsource maturity is also a very, very critical thing because if you look at system of record as opposed to system of engagement, you could say that the system of record, a lot of what we do out here is, and I don't like to use the word, but I'll use it, is less core. It's a less of a core competency. It's for running the bank. And hence, this is very much doable and outsourceable to companies like yours that you can maintain it on an ongoing basis with a lights out operation instead of the company doing it on their own within their own organization, and they can focus on the aspect that matter, the future looking good. Now, if the maturity level is low, which is what happens in a lot of these client environments because they've not set up the complete supplier risk management, the governance methodologies. However it is when you go to the questions, they'll answer the questions. What happens is the maturity level being low results in these organizations not outsourcing it or not giving it to a third party partner to do it for them. As a result of it, they end up spending a lot more effort internally on those things and not on what makes them differentiated in the marketplace. So this in-source maturity, outsource maturity, the risk of the lower score is that the organization becomes less responsive to the marketplace. And that's a very, very important point to understand. Because on system of record, you could train someone and saying, can you do this for me? When you go to internal satisfaction with technology tools, this is very important. And it's not only the technology people you ask, you also ask the business people. Are the tools able to do what they want them to do? So just wanted to add a few of these points because I think when you look from a business perspective, we are the business of servicing our clients, and technology is the enabler and the driver on those. At the end of the day, it's a solution and a product that is being delivered to the client, and it has to be more efficient. Thanks, Scott. That's what I wanted to add.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide. As we mentioned, every time that we work through something like this, we always try to help the leadership understand what the gap costs them. And so I would just say this to you. This is when it comes to doing consulting, when it comes to selling a client on digital maturity, we really focus on making sure leaders understand what is the gap and what does the gap cost you if, for instance, you score a 2 instead of a 4. So if you are not good at this one dimension, what does it cost you? Now, obviously, when we talk about systems of record, these can literally cripple an organization. They can cripple them because they can stop them from being able to have throughput. They can cause their expenses to be too high. When I was working with a client I mentioned yesterday that is on a very old ERP system that has been end of life, the CEO was telling me about how many people they have to have on staff just to rekey information or to verify information because the core system doesn't run well at this point. And so he was saying he was pretty sure that he could easily fund a whole new system and break even pretty fast just from not having to have all the people that were propping up the old ERP system. So when we have gaps in systems of record, we can either throttle the growth of a company or we can make the cost base much too high. And it is, although sometimes for leaders it makes them anxious to invest heavily in systems of record, we really try to make sure that they understand, and I'm sure a lot of you have to do the same thing, that in this modern day and age, if you don't have very good platforms to operate your company, you will not be able to compete. And so it used to be that you had to make sure you had a really nice building. And it used to be there were other types of infrastructure that were really important. But today, what's really important is that you have very good underlying enterprise architecture to be able to build your company from. So that's the way we talk about the gap of what happens if you have lower scores in systems of record than what you should.
And I think, just to add to Scott's portion, one of the biggest gaps and one of the biggest issues that CIOs and Chief Technology Officers are grappling today with is that when you look at system of engagement, you're interacting with the external world who wants things faster, right on time, accurate, and real time, as near real time as it can get. But if you really look at the various healthcare industries, there is financial services industries and manufacturing industries, most of the systems are 25, 35 years old. They're huge humongous system that does processing. So the question is, how do you marry the two together? How do you ensure that you can provide customer what they need, but now you have a batch-oriented system that takes its own effort of running and crunching out details that are provided to the client? So how do you marry the two together? And that is where system modernization and keeping upgrades becomes very important, because that's where the internal application that are 25, 35 years old, people are developing ways on how to extract information from them so that you can send it to your system of engagement application so that the client can be serviced well. The other thing CTOs and CIOs are grappling with is if they've got $100 to spend or 100 rupees to spend on any system or 100 pounds, it seems like 75 to 80 pounds is spending on just maintaining system of record applications, and 20 to 25 pounds they are spent on system of engagement or regulatory issues. So the question is, how can a company like HCL flip that syndrome from them by actually taking system of record off their hands, servicing it for them at a lower cost so that they can spend more money on system of engagement so that they can be much more valuable to the clients. So those are some of the gaps. So when you look at these dimensions, they can be looked at it not as an individual, but also can be looked in the relationship of other dimensions, just like we are giving the example of system of engagement in this case. So here are some of the improvement processes approach of a system of record effectiveness. And these are very self-explanatory if you really go through this. A temporary operation task for specific for improving the overall digital plumbing. And when we talk about digital plumbing,
Okay. So we promised that we would try to show you what our approach is when we're trying to help a client raise scores, because a number of you were asking us how we use the assessment. And so this slide gives you a quick description of how we use the assessment. So when we have a client who has had a low score, the first thing that we normally do is put together a task force. Normally of operations people, but we put together a task force that specific job is to improve the digital plumbing. And we will use that term at times. Instead of enterprise architecture, we'll use the term digital plumbing, but we use those interchangeably. And so there'll be a team put together that says, okay, we scored a 2 and we'd like to move up to a 4, so let's develop a plan for doing that. Once the team's put together, we can start putting together blueprints or graphics or portfolios if they don't already exist. So in many cases, what we find out is that organizations don't have a software portfolio management process, or they don't have any visual blueprints that show what their enterprise architecture is, or what their data layer looks like. And so we will make sure that we create these diagrams and blueprints if needed. Then we will go to those blueprints and we will red flag them. So we will identify what are all the areas of the digital plumbing that are a problem. So whether that's data is not flowing, or systems are outdated, or systems are lacking functionality that we really need, we will red flag the blueprints so that everybody's got one place or one thing that they could look at to really understand what the weaknesses are in our systems of record. We then basically, once we understand the weaknesses, we start developing what the plan is for upgrading. So, in other words, what pieces should be replaced first, second, third? What are the potential new platforms, software platforms, or data structures that can be put in place? And so we basically do the engineering work to upgrade the systems of record, just to be able to build models of what it might look like. And a lot of times we will do those in stages. So, phase one of what could be done the first year, phase two, what could be done the second year, and so forth. And then once we come to agreement on what the upgrading process could look like, then we move on to budgeting. And so, actually trying to figure out who the vendors might be, negotiating pricing, making sure that we have the capital to make the investments. And so I know, there's probably nothing on this list that is magic to you. Go ahead and Sanjay, hit the key one more time, because there's one more. After the budgets are developed, by the way, there's one more step, which is as the projects get okayed and green lighted, obviously we make sure that we've got really good project managers to be able to oversee that, or our company might play a role in doing the program management or the project management. And so again, I know there's probably nothing here that's too new. The second one, the digital blueprints, is probably something that is a little bit unique to our firm. Is we're very good at the blueprinting and very good at creating diagrams so that people understand what their systems of record look like and how they work. We're very good at red flagging, where the weaknesses are. And so, again, we're just trying to show you this is how we use the scoring. And so when an organization has a low systems of record score, we would walk them through these steps in order to design what the improvements need to be. Okay, if anybody has any questions on systems of record, please ask it, and we will move on to technology completeness and leverage, which is a dimension that comes after the two systems on purpose. Now, I want to make one comment before we move on, and that is there are two modern additions to the systems that are becoming more and more important, and at some point we will need to create, a new or two new dimensions to the digital maturity, and that would be the systems of awareness and the systems of protection or security. And so, systems of engagement and systems of record, those are the basic two that make up most of architecture today. But we have a growing amount of systems of awareness, which would be sensors, AIs, smart devices. In other words, devices and machines that have some awareness of their surrounding, they're creating data. And so we have a growing set of systems of awareness. And then, of course, with cybersecurity, we have a growing set of systems of protection or systems of security. And so this model, we will most likely improve this model soon so that we can also measure an organization's systems of awareness and systems of protection. So I say that also so that everybody knows that the model will always be improved. And so every year, we will evaluate what might need to be added or subtracted to this model, so that we are constantly making sure that we are measuring maturity, digital maturity, in a world-class way, which that is our goal always, is to make sure this is a world-class measurement system for maturity. Okay, so once you have measured those two systems, then we have to go ahead and assess the technology completeness and leverage. One of the things that we did not do inside of both systems of engagement and record was to measure, do you have everything that you need? So we could have added that as a parameter, but we broke this out as a separate dimension, mostly because we wanted to add the leverage, which we'll explain to you. Sandra, you can go to the next slide. So after doing consulting for many years, one of the things that we've learned is that an organization is becoming highly dependent on whether their enterprise architecture has all of the tools and weapons that they need. And by the way, when you hear us say things like tools and weapons, typically what we would say is systems of record are tools, and then systems of engagement are weapons. And so we say that because systems of engagement technology, they're weapons to be able to compete and drive more revenue, whereas the systems of record are tools that lower costs and automate. And so anytime an organization is missing tools or weapons, then they are underpowered competitively. And this makes sense. I remember a couple of years ago, we started doing work for a very large insurance organization, and they had a little tiny CRM system and weren't using CRM. And we couldn't even understand how they could have 580 salespeople and no CRM system, essentially. And the reason why was they had a person there that just hated CRM, and he was an older guy, and he just kept refusing to allow the company to buy CRM. Now, when we got there and the company asked for our help, obviously we looked at it and said, a company your size competing in the market that you're in with all of these salespeople, the fact that you do not have CRM, which is a system of engagement, means that you are weakened and you will not be able to win in the future. And sure enough, their revenue was leveling out. They had grown for 35 years straight, and now their revenue for the first time was starting to level out. So, it was interesting because, you would think a company as large as theirs would have understood that they needed CRM as a tool, and they had some young people that absolutely wanted it. It's just that they had some older people that just continued to say, we don't need that weapon. So technology completeness and leverage is looking at two things. First of all, completeness, which is, do you have all of the technology that you should have for your size and your industry? And then leverage is, are you using all of the tools and weapons that you have? And the reason leverage is so important is that we have found in doing many, many assessments of clients that in many cases, they're only using their software at about 40% of its capabilities, or using 40% of the capabilities. And there are many reasons for this. None of them are very good. And we also are not saying that everybody needs to use every piece of software at 100%. None of us on this education right now use all of the capabilities in Microsoft Word. I mean, none of us do. We all use some smaller percentage of its capabilities. But when a company buys an ERP system or buys a manufacturing system or a big warehouse management system, if they're only using 30 or 40 of the percent of the capabilities that they're already paying for, that they've paid to install, then that's a high amount of inefficiency. And it just makes absolutely no sense. And so that's why measuring leverage is really critical, because we're often able to show companies what the low percentages of the capabilities that they already own that they're actually using. Okay, let's go to the next slide and we'll go through the parameters. Well, pardon me, before we do that, we have showed you before kind of the root cause analysis. Let me just show you a root cause analysis around leverage and kind of why technology leverage becomes a problem. So here's the problem that somebody will state to us. They will say, hey, we bought, let's just say Cognos, right? A very sophisticated BI system from IBM. We spent $20 million, and now, it's not helping us the way we thought it would. So, after 2 years and millions of dollars, we're just not getting the value out of it. And by the way, we've heard that over and over and over again with Cognos. But we hear it with a lot of different pieces of software. So what they will say the issue is they'll say, oh, well, the software vendor didn't do a good job of implementing it. Maybe it was the software vendor's fault. Or they'll say, our people don't know how to use the functionality. So we have the tool, but it's really complicated, and our people just don't know how to use it. Or in some cases, they'll say, we just bought the wrong software. We should have bought something else. So after 2 years and millions of dollars, now we think we should have done something else. Well, if you use the 5 whys and you ask yourself, okay, well, why is this a problem? Why is this a problem? Why is this a problem? The true root causes are things like this. You were implementing the software and you got fatigued. The company just got fatigued implementing it. And so because they got software fatigue, they didn't really fully complete it. In other words, we see this with ERP over and over again. People will implement 20 of the capabilities, but they won't implement the other 10. I mean, they literally just will not even turn on and configure the other 10 because they got exhausted doing the implementation. So they literally do not even finish the implementation. They got the basic functionality they said they wanted, and they never turn on any of the other functionality. Or they really lack documentation and training. And so they've implemented a sophisticated system, but they never really create the documentation or the training programs to teach their team members. And obviously, because they don't train or teach their team members completely, or they do a very poor job of training, their team members can't even use a lot of the functionality that's there. Or they have basically had people that have left the organization. So they've implemented an ERP system, and now let's say 30% of the people have left that knew how to use it. When the new people come in, there's no good training for them. And so they just learn from the people who are there. But the problem is the people who are there, they only understood, let's say, 60% of the system. And they don't teach everything they know to the new people. So the new people now only know 40% of what the system can do. And then in another 2 years, when those people turn over and new employees start, now we're down to only understanding 30% of what the system will do. Then the other problem that you have that's a root cause sometimes of low utilization is the application's been upgraded. And so we went from version 7 to 8, 8 to 9, 9 to 10. But most of our team members never really learned the new functionality, or the company didn't do the upgrade. And so, based on that, there's a lot of functionality that the company could have. In a lot of cases, they're paying for it and not getting it. I remember a manufacturer that we did work for. We went in, and their core ERP system was three revisions behind. And they had the typical problem that they had customized it, so they were afraid to upgrade it because they thought if they upgraded it, then they would break some of their customizations. Now the problem was the company was paying, a 18% maintenance fee every year. So every year they were paying a lot of money to have the right for the upgraded system, and then they weren't upgrading. And so, I had to ask the leadership team, why are you paying so much money every year, for in maintenance to have an upgraded system, but then you're not upgrading? And they said, well, we're worried about it breaking customization. I understand that you don't want to break your customizations, but it doesn't make sense to pay so much money for maintenance if you're not going to do that. Siva said, just a comment that I wanted to read to you. The other reason that I've seen is sometimes IT took an isolated approach to implementing particular software without looking at the enterprise view, or how the such and such software could coexist or interact with other systems. So it happens when departments take their own decision. And I absolutely agree with you, Siva. It is it's an enterprise architecture issue that we see quite a bit. Is that somebody went out and bought an application that they saw at a trade show. It didn't really connect to the digital plumbing very well. And so it's not a widely accepted piece of software. And again, normally there's only a couple people that really even understand it. And so, based on all of that, you end up with a bunch of functionality you paid for that very few people are actually using. All right, so let's go on to the parameters. All right, this is a dimension that I really particularly like. We only measure 4 parameters in this one. But each of these 4 parameters gives us very interesting scores. And so I really like this. The first parameter that we measure is workforce enablement. And so you see the homology world again. As we are in a world where workers are doing more co-working with machines, they're co-working with robots, they're co-working with workflows and AI systems. But as we move more and more to a world where workers are co-working with technology, what we want to be able to score and measure is how well are we enabling the workforce to get their jobs done. So, a company's purchased millions of dollars in technology. What we really want to make sure is that that technology is getting everyone to be able to do their job as well as possible. Now, this is an area where we're going to show you in the scorecards later how we break out data between departments. And oftentimes when we do this parameter, what we find out is that we get different scores based on the departments. So in other words, the accounting department might say their score for workforce enablement is high, whereas the manufacturing people might say their workforce enablement is quite low. And so this is where it really makes sense to be able to cut the data when you're doing the scorecard so that we can see very clearly who feels empowered by technology and who doesn't. And so, again, that's all this parameter does, is it's just looking at how enabled does our workforce feel with the current technology that we have. And we will get comments like, hey, we have good technology, we just don't know how to use it. Or we don't have the tools that we need. Or our competitors have better tools. And so that's what we're looking to get because of this. All right, the next is the software portfolio completeness. And so, again, here what we're really looking for is, if you actually look at the next 2, you have software portfolio completeness and then infrastructure completeness. And so what we're looking at in both of these are, do you have all of the tools that you should have? For your size, for your industry, with the competitors that you're competing against, do you have all of the inventory that you need? And so this is the technology completeness part. And obviously we just look at it in terms of software and infrastructure. This allows us to get scores and look at the fact that maybe we have good software, but our infrastructure is really lacking and it causes us problems at the employee level and also maybe at the security level. But more often what we find is people's infrastructure scores are higher than their software scores. So in other words, team members believe that from an infrastructure standpoint, the company has invested appropriately, but from a software viewpoint, they have not, purchased or implemented the tools in the way that they should implement those tools.
I'll give you some real life examples on this one. Is that what you find is that first of all, as Scott said, you'll find the scores to be different. The technology people will say my leverage of my capabilities is 70% in meeting the client needs. You ask the business users, they will say it's 30 to 40%. On average, what we find is that applications, in at least in most of the verticals, are only leveraged 45 to 50%. So the 45 to 50% of the functionality is really leveraged. And on some analysis that has been done, and people have applied lean on this, and one of the things about lean principles is that you should go in and saying what kind of development you're doing. And if you find that 25 to 30% of the development that people are doing to add things on are functions and features that are already available in the existing systems and applications that the business users need, but they are not aware of it. So this also actually talks a lot about the training, talks about the rollout, talks about on how an application should be leveraged at least 65 to 70% of the functionality by business users. The general trend you find is that the average is 45 to 50%. So one of the very quick ways you could do, and I'll go back to one of my experiences at Merrill Lynch, where we cut 25% of the projects because we found that those functionalities were already available in the existing application, and all we needed to do was train the business users to say, here's the functionality and how you can use it. So I think this brought about a communication while people were going down and actually developing the 25 to 30% product development. This is a very, very important thing to make better, faster, and cheaper. So this also makes sure that you can roll out the functionality quicker, you can give client satisfaction much quicker, you can optimize your expense much quicker without really spending much on doing an additional development that was not needed and redundant.
Oh, good observations. I wanted to address a comment from Mahan. It said also software bought will be having risk if suddenly OEM vendor declares EOS or end of life. And that is true that I'm sure all of you, if you've been in consulting long enough, you've worked with clients that there's acquisitions in the industry. One software vendor buys another software vendor, and then when they roll up all the vendors, or when they roll up a lot of their acquisitions, they'll end up life some of the applications, or even manufacturer or somebody will end of life operating system. And so, when that happens, all of a sudden, your technology completeness and leverage, starts to really suffer. So. Definitely true that it's something that happens out there in the world. All right, the last parameter is the technology utilization. And so obviously that's the one that goes directly at the leverage. And so what we're scoring here is of the software that you have or of the technology that you have, how much are you using of it? So how fully are you utilizing its capabilities? What we see when we have lower scores here is it helps us to understand that maybe training programs aren't good, or maybe there's an issue with the software itself, or maybe it was, again, never implemented fully, which I'm amazed when we see things like this, but we see them all the time, that people bought a large piece of core software, they implemented it only at 60, 75%, because that got them the basic functionality that they needed, but they never finished the implementation. They never turned on the other functionality or set up the other functionality. And then once they made the decision to move on and they all stopped implementing it and the vendor stopped, in a lot of cases, they never start again. So they never go to some phase 2 or phase 3 and turn on the rest of the functionality, which to me is just a tragedy because it's such a waste of money. So anyway, 4 parameters, all that provide really good information when you do the assessment and when you can look at the scores. And obviously at our next session, we'll look at some scores here and you will have had a chance to look through the questions. Again, this is why it's so important for you to go through and look at all the questions that we ask in each of these parameters, so that you can see how we are able to gather the data that we are able to gather. All right, Sanjay, go ahead and go to the next slide. And while you're doing that, Keith said, I've seen customers try to use software for purposes it was never intended and could not understand why it did not work. Yeah, I think that's a good point. it's a lot like I have tools in my garage, and I have kids. And at times, my kids will go grab a hammer and use a hammer for something that a screwdriver should be used for, or they'll use the wrong kind of wrench, and they'll ruin the bolt that they're trying to put in instead of using a socket wrench. Well, it's interesting how large organizations at times, because they've purchased a piece of software, will try to make it work for something that it was never meant to work for. And obviously, that lowers the ability to leverage it appropriately.
And to add to that, Scott, I think we talked about the power of why. And I think what we find is people do things because they've been told to do it, even though the process may have changed and the output is not being used. So sometimes it's a very, very good idea to go through the inventory of system, and this actually technology completeness leverage allows you to do that. Go through a complete inventory of all the capabilities you have and seeing if people are even using it and what are they doing with it. Not using it meaning that there are business application people and there are 30 IDs who are using it. No, but I think go and talk to them and saying what do they use it for and what processes. And then you can come to a conclusion whether people are using certain applications. They're doing busy work versus business work. Meaning they're doing busy work because it was important at some point of time for this application, but now they do it some other way. Hence this application can be deinstalled, but people are still using it because no one has told them to not to deinstall it. So I think this is the very, very important question is, and you should apply the power of why to every application. And the first thing one should take is take a complete inventory and saying, what is the purpose they're solving and what's the output they're solving? And you'll find that about 10 to 15% of the applications or even small macros that ITs are supporting are not required because that processes that was to solve a certain problem at a certain point of time, and since then systems have been upgraded to solve that problem, but people have not really cut the processes. So this power of why, and we're trying to relate this to all the things we've been saying for the last 3-4 sessions. This power of why becomes a very, very important aspect because you should not take it, we should not automate the garbage, and we should not automate what people tell us to do or what they think they're doing. We should ask the question why and then automate or transition and make better what is needed to run the business.
Okay, so as we've done with every other one, let's talk about the consulting part of this. So when we discuss with clients what happens when you have a gap in your score, what we would talk to them about is when you paid money for applications and you're not using them completely, then the gap in the score means that you're just wasting capability. So you're wasting money, you're wasting capability. If there is a gap in the completeness, in other words, you're missing tools and weapons that your competitors might have, then the gap creates a competitive weakness. And so, we're always trying to make sure that leaders understand that when you have a low score in technology completeness and leverage, you're most likely inefficiently using tools you already have, or you are missing tools that are very critical to you. Now, again, to answer your questions about how we use this specific dimension when we get the scorecards, we have to break this one into two different pieces because if we find that the scores on completeness are low, so in other words, they believe that there are many types of either software or infrastructure tools that are missing, then what we would tend to do is form a team that would oversee some improvements to the enterprise architecture. And so normally this is probably going to be a cross-functional team that it will include IT and maybe enterprise architecture people if they have them, but it also includes some operations people. So we'll form a team that will review the blueprints or the overall diagrams of the enterprise architecture, and then we will look at what is missing, why is it missing, and then what would it mean if we implemented something. And so, that's kind of the second step is we're going to review the overall software portfolio, for example, and we're going to say, okay, well, what functionality is missing, right? Or infrastructure portfolio, what's missing? Why is it valuable? Why would we need it to be able to help us in the future? Then we're going to look at each separate upgrade, as a separate project. And we're going to look at what would it take to make that upgrade and to either fill in that gap in functionality, or upgrade. So we're going to just, go through the normal things you would go through of projectizing, any of the upgrades that need to be done. We're then going to force rank if there's a number of holes or a number of things that we're missing as far as our completeness. We're going to force rank which ones have the highest return on investment or most critical to the organization. And then, as always, we're going to build an investment plan, to be able to fill in these gaps over a year or 2 years or 3 years, as fast as the organization is willing to do it. Now, it's a completely different plan or approach if we're just trying to improve the leverage or the amount of capabilities we're able to use. And so in that case, what we normally do is we develop a good method to really go back and study the systems that we have and how much functionality are we using. And so we'll probably do a lot of surveying of people, a lot of interviewing people to really understand, okay, are we using 30% of the system's capabilities or 70% of the system's capabilities? And then once we understand that, normally we will choose somebody to own a new training program. And so whether that's a training department or we have to bring in a third party to do this, we'll get somebody to own the responsibility for technology training. We'll do a gap analysis to figure out where the biggest discrepancies are as far as training and what people need the most. And obviously we'll go develop the training programs. We'll try to, as quickly as we can, close the gap for people. And then eventually we'll develop a more standard training operation so that when new employees get brought on, they get trained appropriately. When new software platforms are installed, people get trained appropriately. And so, we believe that one of the biggest problems almost all companies face today is the knowledge gap. The gap between what they could do if they had power users and what they are doing. And so as companies spend more and more money on software, and as the software is more and more sophisticated, as we have more and more sophisticated business intelligence systems and data platforms, we believe there's a larger gap being created between what their technology can do and what their employees can do. And so this really becomes a lot about that dramatically improving training programs so that they can actually leverage what they already own. All right, Mohan had a couple of comments on this, and so he said, during solution designing, if anything is missing and not captured in the bill of materials, then the results in the cost, it results in a cost hit. And yes, I agree with that as well. A lot of times we see just in the requirements gathering that the requirements gathering is not done well. And so the solution design is missing quite a bit. And then again, we can have a system that actually has capabilities to do things. It was just never configured to do those things because the solution design, never asked for it to be configured in the right way. This is a rampant problem that if you've been in technology for 20, 30 years like we have, you see it all the time that people have bought a good piece of software. They didn't implement it well. The reason they didn't implement it was they didn't do good requirements gathering, so the solution design was not complete. And so at the end of the day, you have a tool that could do a lot. It just wasn't designed to actually do that. And then another comment was high customization requirements on purchased applications also result in delays and costs. And I agree with that completely. I think there's a lot more of a movement these days to do less customization. So when we work with ERP vendors, more and more we're seeing them almost force their customers to install the system natively and try to use it natively before they start customizing a lot of things. And so, when people heavily customize a system to try to make the system do exactly what their old processes were instead of changing their processes, sometimes you cripple the system's capability. So you end up not being able to use all the functionality because you customized the functionality out of the system. So it's a good argument for why you should install something natively and try to run on it first before you start doing a bunch of heavy customization.
Yeah, and I think, Scott, just to reflect on that, and we talked a little bit about it, and that's the aspect. The toolkit approach is going out of the door and coming in is business application. So products and systems that allow for business application can be implemented as is. What is configurable is a rule, and the rules you can configure and make it bespoke for your requirements. So the aspect that people want to standardize their processes, standardize their end-to-end capabilities, is resulting in business application coming into play. Just like I took the example of Siebel versus Salesforce. Siebel, you had to do a lot of customization because it was a toolkit, and you have to decide what you wanted to do. But if you take Salesforce in, and you are a very big supporter of, integrator of Salesforce, it's the implementation of Salesforce with the processes already defined, and configure the rules around it, and then you add a little bit of bespoke requirements that are specific to those clients. In the EDM platform, Enterprise Data Management platform that I work with very closely these days, you find that we have done two massive implementations, and none of the clients, asset managers of over 2 trillion assets under management under them, they did not even come up with one additional requirement for customization that that the business application offered. The business application was enough for them. They were able to configure the rules to meet their requirements. And if a requirement came up that was not in the business application, the governance committee, and we talked about governance also a little bit away, made sure to understand if 180 clients in their field don't need this, why do they need it? So those questioning has resulted in more the application being implemented as is, as opposed to doing a lot of customization around it, because the rules, business rules, are configurable and it can be unique. I think that has to be understood, because I think that's where the industry is going, and that's what we try to measure here.
Okay, we're going to move on and spend the rest of the time just doing a quick review of the scorecards from the last two dimensions. So the last two dimensions that we did were the transformational design and the systems of engagement. Again, we want to show you scorecards, but then just show you a little bit about how to read the scorecards and what's important on those. Just a reminder for everybody, the scorecards are divided into quantitative and qualitative. And so the quantitative scorecards basically look at all the questions that were yes, no, or true, false. And so, they theoretically, everybody should have the same types of answers. And then there's the qualitative. And so the qualitative are the questions that are embedded that are more opinion questions of the person that is taking the assessment. And both of these are important to understand for different reasons. Quantitative gives us a really good view of how mature is the company. Qualitative gives us people's opinions about some of those elements of maturity. All right, let's look at the first quantitative scorecard. So, hopefully you're familiar with the scorecards at this point. The scorecards will show you all of the parameters. That's what you see on the right is the list of parameters. And then you have the various boxes with the scores on them. So For instance, the technology design and governance, which is the first one. The scores from the people that took this, we're not ever sure what people are scoring. And by the way, we still have a lot of people who are just saying yes to every answer instead of actually trying to score as if it's a case study for one of their customers. So we have some people that are doing this correctly, and then some people who are just saying yes to everything. Sanjay, can you go ahead and try to take this full screen, just because some people are saying it's hard to read. So what you can see here is on this scorecard, you have for the design governance, you've got a 4, for the process design agility a 4, for the homology balance a 5, 5 for product and service design, 4 for innovation, and a 4 for blueprinting and diagramming. There are no foundation penalties. And the reason that there are no foundation penalties, just to make sure everybody could read this, is because either people just said yes to everything, and so if you said yes to every question, there's no foundation penalty, obviously, or people said no to the beginning questions, and then yes, or pardon me, they said yes to the beginning questions, and then no to the later questions. And so there, again, would be no foundation penalty because they did not say that they weren't doing some of the foundational things, but yet they were the best in the industry. So there were no foundational penalties, but you do see variance. And so, the variance, again, is just showing us on a percentage basis how widely some people's answers varied. And so, you can have a high level of variance, but no foundation penalty. So in other words, you could have some people that said, hey, we're not very good at this at all. Whereas you have other people that they were just saying yes to every question, which is artificial, of course. But what that does is it creates a bit of a higher level of variance. So we can read this and say, if these scores were real, and by the way, I went back and reviewed some of the actual scorecards from each one of you. So I could tell who was answering these things by just saying yes to everything versus who was actually trying to score it for a client as a case study, let's say. And so when I looked at these, it allows me to be able to say, I know why there's a variance on each of these parameters, but I also know why there's no foundation penalty. So just wanted you to see this score, and then obviously if you look over to the left, you have the total organizational score. So this is an example of what we might be sitting down with leaders and saying, hey, on your transformational design, you're in a good place. You're at a 4. You're leading. You're measuring and optimizing, and so your variance is fairly high. It's 25% overall. So you had some real difference of opinions here, but you had no foundational penalties, which is good. So that's how we would read this, if this were a real scorecard.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add to that. So what this scorecard is telling me, if I was to look at it from a different perspective, it's saying I have a perfect design governance capability. So people who are required to be incorporating architecture, everything else, do a near perfect job, and they're involved in it, and they make the right decisions, and we have the process flat, and the governance of approval is very good. We also say on the process design agility 4, that means we are doing customer journey centric approach as opposed to process centric, and we're doing it across the organization. Homology balance is 5. That means that we are perfect on what can be automated and what cannot be automated between the human and automation stuff. So, when you see some of these scores, it's very hard, having done transformation for 30 years, for me to see that anyone would be at this level that high. So clearly we know how the questions have been answered, but if you were to do a case studies, you'll see a lot of these answers come out to be between 2 and 3. It will never be that high. It's what my experience suggests. When you look at innovation agility 4, yes, a lot of people are doing innovation, putting money into it, but how much of that innovation you're bringing in and applying it to your processes and making it better, faster, and cheaper? That's what innovation agility talks about to quite an extent. And that being for meaning that the organization is doing it very well. There's very hardly an organization I find that doing that other than Amazon. Amazon does that pretty well, but they also would be probably around four maximum. So I think these, but if an organization is doing all these things, then they would be, if this is the right score, they would be beating the competition left, right, and center on it.
All right, good point. Let's look at the qualitative. So, again, the qualitative questions give us people's opinions about things, and we're going to show you something else that the qualitative questions will do, because in a lot of cases, the qualitative questions will show you that there's a gap between how people are scoring on the quantitative and how they really feel. So the first qualitative question, just as an example, is a question where we ask, if your organization made 0 changes to your infrastructure, how long do you believe it could serve customers, right, before becoming obsolete? And so, we're just trying to get, if we don't redesign anything and we just go with our current design, how long will it be viable? And in this case, the answers were very consistent, right? So let's say we picked 6 scorecards, 6 people, and they all said the exact same thing, which was 1 to 3 years. And so, that's a really good qualitative outcome for an answer. Let's go to the next one. So in this case, we're asking on a scale of 1 to 10, in your opinion, how quickly does the organization respond with its needs to improve a process? So in other words, when a process has too much human in it and it needs more technology and that technology is available, so the way we're doing that process has become inefficient. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being not fast enough, 10 being very fast, what kind of process design agility does the organization have? Well, in this case, you can see the qualitative answer is 5.6 out of 10. So that's actually lower, than your 4, that people gave themselves for process agility. So now what we're seeing is a difference between the qualitative and the quantitative answers for that question. Or on the humology balance, if a new employee comes to you from a competitor, how impressed do you think they would be with your automation? In this one, score was 6.67, which is a pretty good score. In other words, it's fairly likely that if somebody comes from a competitor, they would be impressed with our ability to automate. And so, these questions were very carefully designed in the way that we asked them so that we could really get some interesting opinions from the groups.
Just to add to that, when you score a 5.67 on process design agility, which is different from the quant score of 4 maturity level, it says that if you needed a new functionality to be delivered to the client, you're going to be at a medium level to actually help meet the client needs. So that tells you how responsive can you be to the marketplace for a new requirement. And that in itself will be troublesome. So I think there are checks and balances built into this assessment where people can gain the scoring to some extent, but then the quantitative scores tell you a little bit. And that's why when you go back with your scorecard and the quant score, you have a 1 or 2 day workshop with your client, you actually go through the discussion points and then out comes the direction and input you want to do. So these are inputs to allow you to have a discussion with your clients.
Okay, so this next qualitative one, this is where, for instance, we want to point out why the way we ask questions really helps us find the truth. So in the parameter that is the product and service design parameter, so in other words, how well can you design your products and services and put technology into them? In this case, your scorecard had it scored at a 5. In other words, your people scored that you were a market leader in this. But when we ask this question, when your organization wants to build or improve an automated workflow, how would that occur? Right? The answers to the questions showed us that no one really believed you have an excellent ability to do that. Okay, so in fact, 2 of the people said that you have a difficult time being able to do that. And 2 of the people said that business users can build their own workflows in a few of the core applications. Okay, but nobody said we have an excellent ability to automate workflows across most applications, right? So, a lot of times by asking questions in this way and more of a kind of a detailed way of what the user's opinion or what the assessor's opinion is, we're able to really see, does the qualitative correlate with the quantitative scores that people have given us?
Overall score is 2, which is not good. But within that 2, it's telling you the symptoms of where the problem lies. The problem lies is where tech teams think that they're doing things that they shouldn't be doing because the business tells them to do because they've got poor governance. The business thinks they've got adequate governance, so they're not doing anything to improve it. So there's a miscommunication, misalignment between the two. The technology team that they think that they have got blueprinting and diagramming to the core and they have captured all the requirements and they do a very good job on that. The business feels very differently. So, here's some of the actionable insights you can do to actually improve the score and get alignment, which will probably make you a solid 2 or 2.5, and then you can do things to improve it. So it also gives you directionally where you need to focus on and what you need to do.
Okay, I want to answer a question from Siva. It said, is the assessment link different than what we did over the weekend? And yes, it is. So there's a different link each session. So we will, after today's session, we will send you the links for the dimensions that we talked about at the beginning. So you will get the dimension for systems of record and for the completeness and leverage. And that is a different link than what you would have filled out last week. Okay, so let's go on and look at the systems of engagement scorecard. And so go ahead and let's flip up to that one. Today's scorecard, in other words, it's all 4s and 5s. There isn't a foundation penalty, but again, we have variance. And what I can immediately see, and I looked at some of the scorecards, was this is because we had a lot of people that just said yes to every question, and then we had some people that answered it honestly. When they answered it, though, they said, we are doing these foundational things, but let's say they got to level 3 or 2, and then they said, we're not the best in the industry, and we're not doing anything else. And so we didn't have an issue where somebody said, hey, we're best in the industry, but we didn't do level 1 things. And so essentially that means we didn't have a situation where somebody said yes to level 5 questions, no to level 1 questions. So because of that, that's why we don't have foundation penalties here. But we do have variance because some people said yes all the way through level 5s, whereas some people only said yes to level 2s or 3s. And so you had roughly 25% variance from everybody, which would be, if this were a real scorecard, we would really want to understand why there is so much variance. So why do some people believe one thing in a quantitative analysis where some people believe something else? Again, nothing much different on the total organizational score. So it looks about like the last scorecard. It's a level 4 would be where it was if we were doing this for real. All right, let's go on and look at let's look at some qualitative. So on the qualitative, we just pulled out one set to look at, and so this both comes from the customer intelligence parameter, and so we'll just look at that one parameter. So in the customer intelligence parameter, these were the 2 questions that were embedded. The first question was, in your opinion, how well do you really know your customers? Compare the relationship to a family dynamic. So do you believe your customers are close friends, acquaintances, or strangers? It's an interesting question because obviously what you would want is you would want all your customers to be friends or close friends. But when your people scored, you can see that we picked out a handful here that we added together for this. You had a number of people that picked out stranger. So in other words, we don't know our customers very well at all. And then a number of people had said, well, they're just acquaintances. So again, stranger and acquaintance is not a good thing to be in. Now, if we would have seen this scoring, that you would have quantitatively said we're a 4 or a 5, we would say, okay, there's a mismatch that we are going to have to discuss.
This also tells that you're being that because your 50% is less than a friend. It tells you something. It tells you that you are a vendor to your client. You're not a partner to your client. And when you're not a partner to your client, then you do not get the insights into things that are important for them.
Okay, Siva asked a question. Can I see the scores on the customer that I scored? Siva, yes, it's technically possible. I mean, everything is in a database, and so we can go back to your email address and we can pull out just a scorecard for your scores. If that's something that was important to you, we probably would just need you to send us an email. So just send us an email and say, here's what here's the scorecard I'd like to see. And we can probably have Sarah pull that out for you. But yes, this is all in a very large data warehouse. So we can pull out.
Just for process, I would suggest send it to Madhavi, and Madhavi can send it to us.
Yeah. So yeah, we just want you to know, Siva, yes, we absolutely can pull out any individual score. We can, if we knew your department and everybody was a separate department, we can aggregate by department. I mean, we slice these in a lot of different ways. If we wanted to, for instance, we could slice male and female. I mean, there's, when we go to analyze the scorecards, it really just depends on what the project is with the client, what we might do. So anyway, this is just a good example of qualitative. The second qualitative question was, in your opinion, how personalized are the relationships that you have with your customers based on the amount and type of data you have collected? Personalization is one of the hottest things in marketing. So, obviously we want this to be a fairly high score. And so, your folks scored a 6.3. It's not bad. I mean, we'd probably like to see that score be an 8, maybe a 9, depending on the client. So this might be something that would cause us to have a conversation with them. But that's not a bad score today to, have a 6.3. And so, again, just trying to show you how we use qualitative questions. All right, let's look at an even better example of departments. So this is an example of looking at a systems of engagement scorecard across many departments, and these are actual scores. So we took the name of the client off of this, but I mean, I know what client it is. And you can see this was a client that had many different business units, actually separate corporations, but they call them business units. And they were actually trying to score their systems of engagement across all the different business units. And so, this was interesting because it was fairly consistent. But there were some anomalies, that made us kind of look for different things. So, for instance, if you look at the digital presence, the second line, you can see that there's a decent amount of variance across the business units at how well they think their digital presence is handled online, their website, their social technologies. But where you can see a huge difference is if you look at the division D and the division Y, right? You have a 2 and a 4. Right, so you have one division or operating unit that believes that their digital presence is really pretty good, whereas others don't. And so this gives us an opportunity to find out, are they really that good, or do they just not even understand what good is? But it allows us to check the anomaly. If you look right below that, they turned around on their digital marketing revenue engine and scored themselves a 5. So best in the industry, whereas Division 12 scored themselves a 1. And so you have a huge variance here as far as the digital marketing revenue engine, as far as how these different business units scored themselves. And you can also see, if you go all the way to the bottom, the in-source outsource, the Division 12 scored themselves a 0. So in other words, they don't probably have any ability to outsource at the moment. But you could also see that whole parameter, the in-source, outsource maturity, is basically a 1 across the whole company. So this tells us they have fundamental problems with their vendors and their contractors as far as how they're handling digital marketing and systems of engagement. And, of course, when we studied this further with the company, it's absolutely true. It's also true that they are behind some of their competitors with their systems of engagement at all. I mean, they have competitors that are beating them in the market with their systems of engagement. And so again, this is a live scorecard with a client we took their name off, but just wanted you to be able to see what it looks like when you can really break down an organization by business unit or by department. Go ahead and show the spider diagram. We haven't showed this to you yet, but I just wanted everybody to be aware that we will at times take the departments and do a spider diagram. And so we have the ability to do different types of data visualization with the maturity model. And so in this case, again, this is a live one from a real client. And it's just showing a number of different departments. And it's just showing a spider diagram as a way to look at the maturity level. And sometimes, these spider diagrams are helpful. Sometimes they're not helpful, just as a visualization tool. But just wanted you to see that when we produce results for people, we sometimes produce the results in a graphical format like this, just so it's easier for them to do. All right. So we're getting to the end of this session. We have probably 10 or 12 minutes left. And so, first of all, Sanjay, do you have any closing comments? And then, while he's getting closing comments, if anybody has any questions, please ask your questions now as we close up for today.
Yeah, so we are in the meat of this digital maturity model discussion, and I think what we showed today was how the scoring. One is to understand the theory behind it, what are the dimensions, what's the parameters, taking the answers questions, but usually that's where most of the assessment model ends. What you need this assessment model to do is not only measure but give you actionable insight, give you a story, give you information that you can align yourself with the client and do it. So the various spider diagrams and everything else is visual representation where you can actually have a discussion around with your client on this. So I think the more if you can answer the questions taking a certain client in mind, I think you'll find the scoring to be very effective. But as you know, the quantitative and the qualitative are checks and balances we have. So even though someone may be scoring as they have been scoring, we can on the qualitative side say, okay, here's a disagreement with what it's saying. So how do you balance that? So these are very important things. So those will be my closing comments.
Okay, I think that that is all for today. Just remind everybody, please look at the questions very carefully as you are answering them. We would prefer that you answer the questions as if it is a client and not just say yes to all of them, because when you say yes to all the questions, it kind of throws off the scoring a little bit. So we would love if you would pick out a client and just answer as if you were that client. That will help us a little bit when we show you the scorecards at the next session. And again, just when you're answering the questions, just understand how we start out with level 1 questions, go to level 5 questions, and just try to imagine how these questions help us as consultants to see how developed the client is. And then just a reminder, a lot of our clients really value taking the assessments just from what they learn. So even outside of the scoring, answering the questions helps them understand what some of the best practices are. And so just a reminder that just answering the questions is beneficial to our clients.